Hey everyone, welcome back to the Marnie Homestead. I am in the garden today, believe it or not, still working on fall cleanup. Yes, I've been working on fall cleanup for what feels like weeks, because it has been weeks. And I was just thinking the other day, why is this taking me so long? And I think I figured it out. I don't mind the spring cleanup transitioning to summer. I don't mind the summer cleanup transitioning to fall, but the fall cleanup transitioning to winter, I don't like it, because I know nothing's going in its place and it's really hard to just see bare spaces all over the garden. Alas though, it needs to happen. Otherwise, you know, things just rot and it's not good. Oh, Peter Rabbit is here. Let me show you. Hi, Peter. Oh. So a fun fact, that is my orphan rabbit that lives in my garden. So earlier in the spring, I had a rabbit nest that Mama Rabbit built under my sugar snap peas. And there were about 8 babies in there. And one day they were all gone, but then I noticed that there was this one that kept hanging out in the garden. And he has been here ever since. I named him Peter Cottontail, Peter Rabbit. And he's totally comfortable being around me. He hangs out here all the time when I'm in the garden, and he just, like, this is his, you know, kind of home away from home, and I'm okay with it. So he forages in the garden and shares a little bit with me, and I'm absolutely okay with that. But anyways, back to the point of today. I'm doing some fall cleanup, even though it's really, really hard, but it needs to get done. But when I was out here, I was thinking about these 2 things that didn't occur to me until a couple years ago when I was gardening, and I figured they might be helpful for other folks to kind of think about. So one of the things that you should be doing, I recommend that you do a couple times throughout the year, but particularly in the fall, is paying attention to where the sun is in your garden at different times of day. So for me, we kind of look behind me, so I have 3 rows of beds. And this row that's back here is the closest to my neighbor behind me, and he has a large bush hedge on this side, and this is south, so north, east, south, west. And so obviously the sun's gonna come up in the east and then it goes down in the west, so it sets over behind me here. But the other thing that happens is the sun changes its height in the sky. So in the early spring and throughout the summer, the sun is more directly overhead, even leaning a little bit more towards north. And then come the fall, the sun starts to fall in the sky and it's gonna be leaning more towards the south. And so what happens in my garden is I start to get a lot of shade on that back row of beds that's right by my neighbor. So I'll show you one of them here. This bed here, this square bed, almost completely in the shade, and it's 12 o'clock right now. So we're pretty much at midday. We've had about half our sun for the day, and it's still pretty shaded. And this became apparent to me last year in the fall. I was trying to grow broccoli in this row of beds because I didn't have my 3rd row, and I was trying to grow my broccoli in this back bed, and it would not grow. It would not grow, and I finally realized it was not getting the sun it needed. So that is actually why I added, let me get out of the sun for a second. That is actually why I added that 3rd row, so that I could plant more things in the garden come fall time. I definitely don't need all 9 beds for a fall garden, but I would like at least 6. This year I'm actually using about 4.5, because I didn't plant as much stuff just due to other things that were going on. But you can see that these beds are all completely in the sun and will remain in the sun until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So they're still getting about 6 to 7 hours of sun a day. So that's definitely something to pay attention to. Start looking at it now so you can prepare for next fall. But definitely I would say pay attention to how the sun hits your garden in the spring, summer, and fall. And, you know, notice where you're going to get more shade, because if you are growing things that require full sun and you're getting a part of your garden that is in part shade or full shade, it's never going to grow. So you need to plant things that can handle a little bit more shade, like your lettuces, your leafy greens. They don't need as much sun typically. So that is the one tip that I would say has been the biggest difference maker just in how I think about how I lay things out in my garden, and ultimately contribute to the success that I'm getting in the garden. The other thing that I love to do in the fall time is to really spend some time in the garden just thinking about what did well, what didn't do well, looking through photos that I took throughout the season and starting to think about any changes that I might want to make for next year. Where I am, zone 5B, again, I live in the outskirts of the Chicagoland area. There is about 3-4 months where nothing's really happening in the garden. The garden still will be producing through mid-November for me, and then I'll start putting stuff in the garden late March, early April. But again, December, January, February, there's not a lot growing, so that's when I do a lot of my planning. I start sourcing where I might be getting materials from, and all of that type of stuff. So I'll tell you, like for me, one of the things that I learned this year was when I put these two, and I'll try to show them behind me, when I put these two cattle panels up, let me flip you around. When I put these two cattle panels up this year, I was really hoping that this middle part would have these beautiful flowers in it, like you see right now. And it did for a little bit of time, but when I grew things on the cattle panel, on this side I had my spaghetti squash, and on this side I had cucumbers. The vines of the spaghetti squash in particular and the leaves just got so big that it shaded out most of the flowers that were here. And so they did survive, they did bloom a little bit, but they are definitely doing better now since I removed all of those spaghetti squash plants that I harvested from about a month and a half ago. So, you know, for me, again, I feel like I continue to learn every season. There's no way that you could ever know everything about gardening. And excuse me, that was something that I definitely paid attention to this year and realized that although it looks like I have the space to plant flowers in the middle of these two cattle panels in the spring, when the stuff on the cattle panels start growing, they're going to shade everything else out. And so while it might look bare in the spring, for me, it's better to kind of leave that space if I'm going to continue to grow larger vining plants like spaghetti squash on them, because they are going to eventually shade them out. The other thing that happens here in my growing area is we get really hot and really humid in the summer. And so I definitely struggled with disease in my spaghetti squash plants, but also I got a lot of powdery mildew on my zinnias that I had between those two cattle panels because there just was not enough air flow, air circulation during those hot and humid summer months. So I definitely made note of that. The other thing that I made note of this year in the garden, because I added my third row, was just the kind of maintenance that I have to do throughout the season to maintain that green stuff in the pathways, which is a mixture of grass, and it's starting to get taken over by creeping Charlie and clover in a lot of areas. But it was really challenging to mow around the beds. I had to string trim all in the middle because these barrel planters that are here, I can't get my lawnmower in between them all. So a lot of it was string trimming, and it's not my favorite thing to do or my husband's favorite thing to do. So needless to say, it was definitely not an enjoyable task this year with the addition of the other 3 beds and an additional row. So I actually think what I might be doing next year is putting down landscape fabric in all of the walkways of my garden, potentially going a foot out from the outside of the garden. So putting down landscape fabric, probably like black fabric, like plastic almost, that will kill the grass and the weeds underneath it, and then mulching all of the pathways. So it is just a kind of more permanent gardening space, I guess I would say, that would not require any mowing or maintenance in between. And I also just think it would look really clean, and it would really kind of create a more solid footprint for the garden in the backyard. So yeah, this is the time of year where I like to start thinking about those things. Think about what worked, what didn't work. Was there any reason why they did or didn't work? And again, think about some of the changes that you want to make in your garden for next year, because it's all fresh in your head right now. And we all take a lot of pictures. If you don't take a lot of pictures, definitely do. But even with pictures, sometimes it's just not quite as fresh in your head come springtime. So I like to start making notes about all those things right now so that my garden is ready for the springtime. And again, I can spend my winters planning where I might be getting things like landscape fabric or mulch from to make sure that I am ready to go as soon as the temperatures start to warm up enough in the springtime. All right, guys, I gotta get back to garden cleanup. Again, it's not my favorite task, especially in the fall, but it needs to get done. So I hope these tips were helpful for you. Again, pay attention to how your sun is hitting your garden multiple times throughout the year. But if you haven't done it this year, start now, start in the fall, because you can definitely garden into the fall and sunlight makes a big difference. And so if you're aware of that, you can better plan your space. And again, think about what worked, what didn't work, and think about what changes you want to make for your garden for next year and start making note of that. All right, guys, I'll catch you in my next video. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll talk to you soon.